So I guess we are ready to start. So welcome to the ComSoc video seminar. Today we will have two speakers. First will be Oskar Skibski, then Elliot Ancelewicz. But before I will introduce the speakers, or in fact the first speaker, let me remind you how this seminar proceeds. So the talks will last 20 minutes each. So first we'll have 20 minutes from Oskar. Then we have a 10-minute question session for Oskar. So each question you can ask, during the session you can of course ask questions as it comes fit, but sometimes there are questions that you would like to ask during the presentation, and then the best way is to write question in the chat and simply type it there, and during the question you will see it. So like what's happening from Ule, and 20 minutes from now we will answer him. Of course, occasionally in the chat, someone will answer your question. Sometimes discussions happen there, so feel free to do that. After these 20 minutes questions, 10 minutes, 20 minutes talk, 10 minutes question, we'll have a coffee break, which I believe also lasts 10 minutes. Is that right, Dominic? Yes, 10 minutes. And for the coffee break, you will be split into more or less randomly generated by someone, small groups, and you will be moved to breakout rooms. So of course, if you would like to participate and then just talk with someone, if you're lucky with Oskar or Elliot or with whoever else, then of course you're welcome to do that. Or you can simply not turn on your camera and go take actual real coffee, or do it in the middle. So I think we are ready to start with a presentation by Oskar Skibski. So Oskar is at the University of Warsaw. He did his PhD there, but then he moved for a postdoc to Japan, to, I believe, the group of Makoto Yoko. His early work was about Shapley value and all sorts of things like that, and it was a proof that you can reach a contradiction there, because his contribution was certainly not marginal. Indeed, it earned him a best PhD in AI theory in Poland award. He's also quite an exciting teacher. He was presenting at TEDx Warsaw. So he talked about breaking down terrorist networks. He's currently working about centrality measures. And I believe he will be talking about that today. So to quote my advisor, Oskar, tell us great things.
Okay, thank you, Piotr, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. So, I should, am I sharing the screen? No, not yet, I guess. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, so today I will not talk about social choice, unfortunately, sorry for that. I will not talk about Christmas trees. I will talk about centrality measures. So, so my talk is titled Axiomatic Characterization of PageRank. It's a joint work with Tomasz Wąs, also from Warsaw. Okay, so centrality measures basically answer the question which node is the most important node in a network. This problem arises in different fields, like in biology. If you have a biological network, if you have a social network, World Wide Web, or any network you can think of, you can ask which node is the most important. And there are many methods to identify the most important node. The simplest one is just to look at the degree of a node. So we just look how many people or how many other nodes a specific node can influence directly. But there are other ideas. So this is very, we only look at the direct connections here. So we can, for example, try to find the node which is most in the middle of the network. And closeness does exactly that. So it basically look at the average distance to all other nodes. And in this graph, we'll get this blue node in the middle. It's most in the middle. And a third classic centrality measure is betweenness centrality. And it looks how often a node is intermediary in the network, how often a node is on a shortest path between other nodes in the network. And here the best node according to betweenness centrality is this B node on the right. Yeah, so there are, as you can see, all these different measures gives different results. So it basically boils down to the question which centrality measure we should use if we have some specific application at hand. So these three classic centrality measures are just 3 examples, but there are many more centrality measures proposed in the literature. So actually I created a graph like this that shows how many centrality measures were proposed every 5 years. So in the last 5 years, there was more than 100 different centrality measures proposed in the literature. So I think we are heading to some lockdown or something when someone comes up and say, okay, you are not allowed to propose any new centrality measure. You just have to pick one of the existing ones. Yeah, so these centrality measures are based on different ideas. So this closeness is based on the distances to other nodes, and there are many more centralities like this. There are these medial centralities like betweenness that look at the how important as an intermediary a specific node is. There's vitality indices, so it includes also the class of centrality measures that are based on Shapley value and coalitional games. But today I will focus on feedback centralities, and yeah, because PageRank belongs to feedback centralities. So how do these feedback centralities work? So basically, feedback centralities, if we have some nodes, we try to assess this node by the importance of its neighbor. So if we have a directed network, we look at the importance of the direct predecessors of a node. So here we have node V, and we have 3 direct predecessors. I'm pointing to the screen, but you are probably not seeing that. Yeah, so we have three predecessors, and they have some importance, and we basically try to say what is the importance of node V based on the importance of the direct predecessors and the number of the direct predecessors. So I divided these feedback centralities into 2 classes, parallel and distributed feedback centralities. And in degree is the simplest feedback centrality, just look at the number of direct predecessors. But this is obviously not the best choice because some nodes may be more important. And if we include this importance of these predecessors in the formula, we get something like this. So the importance of node V is just proportional to the sum of importance of direct predecessors of this node. Yeah, and this is eigenvector centrality. Eigenvector centrality doesn't work for all graphs. So when I say it doesn't work for all graphs, I mean that it doesn't make sense for some graphs. So for example, if we have a couple of different components, then only in one component we'll have non-zero values. So there are, so for example, cut centrality solves this problem. So for every node we have additional value, baseline importance added. So it can be considered a node weight, and it can be constant if we prefer. And this is the third parallel feedback centrality. And all these centralities are based on the idea that if we have some predecessors, then if they have some like a virus or something, or if they have some information, that this information on virus replicates to all other nodes. But often it's not the case. If we have a web page, and on this web page, on Wikipedia web page, we have 100 links, then we'll click only one of these links and move on. Or if we have an article and it has 50 references, then we'll probably use like 3 of them and will not read all of them after we see this article. So in distributed feedback centralities, we divide the importance, basically divide what we had so far. So we divide the importance of these predecessors by the number of their outgoing edges. So beta measure is defined as follows. So node U1 has 2 outgoing edges, so we divide 1 by 2. And for node 2, we have only 1 outgoing edges. For node 3, we have 3 outgoing edges. And if we do the same for eigenvector centrality, we'll get a centrality that's called Katz prestige. It is well defined only for strongly connected graphs, and we don't need this lambda. So I didn't discuss this lambda. This lambda is some largest eigenvalue of the adjacency matrix. It's not important at this moment. So Katz prestige, and if we do the same with Katz centrality, we'll get PageRank, and PageRank is defined as follows. So we have some decay factor. We have this A, it's between 0 and 1, and we multiply the importance of the predecessors, but divided by the number of their outgoing edges. We sum the importance, we multiply it by this decay factor, and we also have this node weight, so some external in baseline importance of this node. Okay, so as you can see, there are many different similar notions of centrality measures. So why should we use PageRank? So the question is, why should we use PageRank out of all these centrality measures? And PageRank is actually one of the, I think, 3 or 4 most popular centrality measures used in the literature. So why we should use PageRank? And there are many different reasons why people use PageRank. So one reason, which is maybe at least a little bit sensible, is that it can be computed fast, because that's true. But other reason is that it's popular, so other people use it. So I'm always also using PageRank. Other reason, it works for the World Wide Web, so that's why we can apply it to biological network, and we hope it will make sense as well. It makes sense intuitively, so if we look at the definition, it makes sense. So people think that it probably will give you some good results. It gives results that we wanted to achieve after we applied it. And finally, the last reason, it is complicated, so it has to do something smart. So it is a result of a system of recursive equations. So it's hard to say what are the values, but it has to do something smart, right? Because it's complicated. So for example, on this graph that you have at the bottom, so according to PageRank, these 2 nodes are the most important. And I think it will be surprising for many people who actually use PageRank in their paper to see that these nodes are actually the most important nodes according to PageRank. Yeah, usually people point out to this middle node, but these nodes are the most important. Okay, so to come up with some good reasons to use PageRank, or maybe even decide whether PageRank is a good measure or not, so we applied the axiomatic approach. And in recent years, there are many papers about axiomatic approach to centrality measures. If I have time, I will discuss it at the end. But now I think it's time to dive into this, to our axiomatic characterization. So we wanted to model the web. So we consider directed multigraphs with node weights. So we have some set of nodes. These nodes represent pages. We have multi-set of edges, because one page can have several links to the same page. Self-loops are also allowed, because one page can have a link to itself. And we also have some node weights. These node weights in the web may represent like some initial importance of websites, or for example, your bookmarks. Only these nodes can have value node weight equal to 1, and other nodes can have weight 0, or all these node weights can be equal for all web pages. And the centrality measure is just a function that, given a graph and a node, returns a real value. So for every graph, for every node, we need one real value. And on this, and I usually denote it with this red text near the node. Okay, so we propose to axiomatize PageRank. We propose 6 axioms. So 5 of these axioms are invariance axioms. So these axioms say something like this. So if some conditions are satisfied, and if we do some operation, then centrality of some nodes will not change. So I just need to specify this sum for all these nodes. Oh, sorry, maybe there's some question on chat. Or maybe I will discuss it later on. Yeah, and answer to the question. The question was about the axiomization of Altman and Tenenhaus. Okay, yeah, so 5 invariance axioms. So the first two axiom, the first axiom is node deletion. So for every graph G, and if there exists an isolated node, if we remove this isolated node from the graph, then the centrality of all nodes remaining in the graph will not change. So this is a very simple axiom. Removing an isolated node does not affect the centrality of any other node. So second axiom, edge deletion. So consider removing some edge UW from the graph. And so what we are saying is that if we remove this edge UW, then the centrality of nodes which are not successors of U will not change. So successors are nodes that can be reached from U in a couple of steps through some links. So if a node is not a successor of U, then his importance will not be affected. So here, these nodes are not successors of U. So for example, U is not its own successor. And because of that, these centralities cannot change. Yeah, so this is the second axiom. Removing an edge from the graph does not affect the centrality of any node which is not a successor of the start of this edge. So this is important, start of this edge. Okay, so these two axioms basically identify elements which are not important for the importance, is not important for the importance of some specific node. And next to axiom, consider the importance of an edge. So basically we consider two edge operations. So edge multiplication and edge swap. So edge multiplication is something like this. So we have some graph, we pick some node U and we pick some number K, a natural number K, and we replace every outgoing edge of U by edge. Okay, so this is what happens if we replace every outgoing edge of U by 2 outgoing edges. And this operation does not change the centrality of any node. Okay, and this basically tells us that it does not matter how many edges we have from some specific page. It matters what is the proportion of these edges that from this node that goes to us. So for example, if we have a web page with 1 million links, then 1,000 link is as important as 1 link out of 1,000. So basically, yeah, this can be considered like avoiding some manipulation, like creating a website with a lot of links. We only care about the proportion of links that goes to us. Okay, the fourth axiom is edge swap. So assume we have some graph and we have 2 edges, U prime and W prime, and assume that U and W has the same number of outgoing edges and the same centrality. So they are equally important. They have the same number of outgoing edges. Then we can swap ends of these edges. So if we have a graph like this on the left-hand side, then if we swap the ends of these edges, then the centralities of any node will not change. So yeah, so this, okay, thanks, Piotr. So this axiom basically tells us that the importance of the benefit of an edge basically depends on the importance of a node that we are getting this edge from and the number of its outgoing edges. Okay, and this was the fourth axiom, and I still have 2 axioms left. So the fifth one is the last invariance axiom. So it's it's called node redirect. And what does it says though? So assume we have a graph and we have 2 out-twins. So out-twins are nodes which have the same outgoing edges. So in this graph, U and W are out-twins. So they only have 1 edge to node with the black node on the right. It's not named. Okay, so if we redirect one node into another, then the centralities of other will not change, and the centrality of these 2 nodes will be combined into this new node. And what I mean by redirecting one node, so basically we think that they are 2 web pages, right? So they have the same content, the same links, And now what we are doing is that we are deleting one of these websites, and we are rewiring these links that was coming to node U. We rewiring these edges to node W. So basically we are merging these two nodes, but we are not making we are not duplicating the content of the website. So it's basically merging of two nodes. And if we merge these two nodes, then the centralities of other nodes will not change, and the centrality of this node will be combined. Okay, yeah. And these 5 invariance axioms, our main result is that if a centrality measure satisfies these 5 invariance axioms, then it is PageRank for some decay factor A times some constant. Okay, so this is this is the main result. And if we add this baseline is just to get rid of this constant that we have in this theorem. So if we say additionally, then in a graph with an isolated node, this node that is isolated has the centrality equal to its node weight, so this baseline importance, then if we add this axiom, then we'll get the full characterization of PageRank with 6 axioms. Okay, yeah, so here there is a comparison that shows which axioms are satisfied also by other feedback centralities. So node deletion, edge deletion are kind of like a standard axioms. We delete isolated node or delete some edge from our predecessor, far predecessor. Edge swap is definitely a property which is characteristic for feedback centralities. So it's satisfied by all feedback centralities and all these feedback centralities, and it's not satisfied by other centralities like betweenness or closeness. They will not satisfy this axiom. Edge multiplication, as you may expect, is characteristic for this distributed feedback centralities. It is satisfied by these distributed feedback centralities that is not satisfied by these parallel feedback centralities. And node redirect and baseline are more specific, so they are satisfied by some of them. So as I marked here, so when I'm saying that a specific value satisfies a weaker version of an axiom, I mean that this axiom, some of these centralities are not defined for all graphs. So for example, cat prestige makes sense only if the graph is strongly connected. So if we consider axiom like node deletion, so we are deleting an isolated node, it doesn't make sense, right? So we can only say that this axiom is trivially satisfied because for every strongly connected graph, if we remove an isolated node, then we can be the king of the world, because this statement is already trivially satisfied. So that's why it shows that the cat prestige actually satisfied this axiom, but they are trivial, but it satisfied the weaker version of this axiom. Yeah. And the question is the first axiomization of PageRank? So the answer to this question is yes, but there is a small star here. And the reason is that sometimes cat prestige, so this centrality that I just showed you is called PageRank. And in the original paper by Page et al., it's called like a simplified version of PageRank because it has worse computational properties. And this centrality is sometimes also called PageRank. And there are axiomization of cat prestige. And yeah, so I actually have a comparison here, but since there was a question during, maybe I can answer it during the question time of my presentation. What do you think, Piotr? I'm not sure. So 0, yeah, you are showing 0. So maybe I will just move to the question and conclude the presentation. So we use axiomatic approach to analyze centrality measures, and we basically propose the first axiomatic characterization of PageRank in its general form with decay parameter with node weights. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot. So I think we have the usual round of applause after the talk as well. So let's turn on the microphones and clap our hands, or if you're German, you can do something else. Thanks. And now we start the question session for Oskar. So I guess, Oscar, maybe you would like to look at the chat and answer the questions there, and then we can maybe new questions will appear or someone will ask through microphone. So maybe let's go like that.
Yeah, so sorry I didn't answer the question earlier. So yeah, it was.
I think that's actually usual.
Okay, great. Okay, so the first question: what is the difference in approach between the axiomatization of the one by Altman and Tenenholz? So actually, I wanted to talk about it. I didn't have time apparently, but I can answer it now. So as I said, Katz prestige, so this simplified PageRank is a different centrality measure than the general PageRank with decay factor and with weights. So so there are two axiomization of Katz prestige. One is by Altman and Tenenholz from EC, and one is by Palacios, Huerta, and Volli. And this is actually an axiomization of invariance methods to measure the importance of journals in the citation networks. But this is basically Katz prestige, so divided by the number of articles or something like this. So there are these two axiomatizations. And as I said, Katz prestige is different, and PageRank in this general version of PageRank does not satisfy most of these axioms. And why is the case? So Katz prestige, if you recall the definition, so in Katz prestige, the whole importance of one node or one page is transmitted to the next page, right? And in this definition of PageRank with decay factor, we have this decay factor that just multiply by this importance. So for example, if we have one edge in a graph and we replace this edge by three different nodes, then according to Katz prestige, the whole importance of f of node u will be transmitted through these nodes to node v. And in PageRank, it does not work that way, because we have this decay factor and this value is multiplied by this diminishing factor. And also the second difference is that in Altman and Tenenholz actually axiomatize the ranking obtained from PageRank, and here we axiomatize the numeric value of PageRank. So not ranking, but the exact values of PageRank. So that's the other difference. Other questions. FV of G is just a number, right? Right, that's right. Sorry, I didn't answer earlier. So Ariel Procaccia, the way I think about PageRank as the stationary distribution of a random walk on the graph would seem to be consistent with Katz prestige, not with your definition of PageRank, which adds a bias to each node. Can you please clarify? So my definition of PageRank is actually the original definition of PageRank from Page et al. Paper, and they actually define the simpler version without this decay factor. But there are problems with this definition because, for example, if some node does not have any outgoing edges, then the random surfer doesn't have a place to go. And that's why they defined the random surfer model. I didn't discuss it because it was not important for my presentation, but random surfer model, we go through the internet, and with some probability, 1 minus a, we start all over again. So we go through the network, and with some probability, we start all over again. That's the original definition of random surfer model that results in a stationary distribution that is PageRank. And there is this decay, the probability that we will start all over again, and that's why the decay factor is also included in this model of random surfer. Vincent Koniter, following up on Amar's question, how is the redirect related to Altman-Tenenholz collapse? More generally, taking the union of two papers, there are a lot of axioms. Is there any good general way to think about which combination of these axioms characterize PageRank? So collapsing basically says something very similar to this node redirect that we have. So we basically merge some nodes into into one node. I don't remember exactly what is there any difference or not, but they are basically very similar. Isomorphism is a very general axiom that is satisfied by all centrality measures basically proposed in the literature. So there are some relations here also between these axioms. I don't remember. So invariance to reference intensity is basically very similar to this edge multiplication that we have. So we use some of these ideas that are in these papers, but we couldn't use the general scheme of the proof and the general scheme of these papers because they axiomatize a different centrality measure, and that centrality measure that is well defined only for a strongly connected graph. Like Altman and Holtz use they consider only strongly connected directed graphs, and yeah. So yeah, I hope it answers your question. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I think Ula has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. It was very interesting. I was wondering, so you are axiomatizing really the numbers exactly that you get. What ultimately what we care about is whether one node has a higher rank than another one. So this comparative notion, which I think is what you indicated that Altman and Tenenholz did that. So is there a natural way to reformulate your axiomatization to get this, which seems to me the more natural question that we ultimately are interested in?
Yeah, so I'm not sure this is I'm not sure the ranking is what we only care about. So I think the difference between the values that we obtain through PageRank is important. So it's important whether as I have on the first slide, so it's important whether the node is like 10 times more important than the other, or is it just 2 times more important, or it's slightly more important. So I think it's also valuable to have numerical values. So, and this is, yeah, in most applications, in most application of centrality measure, you don't only look at the ranking and you look at these values and you compare it. So, yeah, so I think it's valuable. Regarding the question, can it be adjusted to, if I understand correctly, can it be adjusted to have axiomatization that considers ordinal, the ranking of nodes? So I think most of these axioms, node deletion, edge multiplication, edge swap, all these axioms basically says that the centralities do not change. Centralities do not change, and maybe only these last two node redirect baseline actually care about the numeric value. So I think one can try to come up with a axiomatization of a ranking based on these axioms.
So quick follow-up. So this last axiom is really an axiom that says for this kind of graph and this node, it should be equal to beta. So,
yeah, so
you're plugging the number directly. So do you have any way of axiomatizing a nice choice of beta? Like, so this is the right beta because of that axiom?
Yeah, so the beta is the input of our model, right? So the beta is predefined. So we have a graph with betas, and these betas represent basic importance of nodes, and we are just saying, okay, so if you are not connected to the network, then your importance is equal to this basic importance. So yeah, so I wanted to highlight that our 5 axioms without this baseline axiom characterize PageRank up to scalar multiplication. So basically this is the main result. So to have the exact values, we need at least to pin it at some point, right? And this is the way we do, this is how we do it. So we just say that isolated nodes have very small importance. Yeah, so yeah, but this is exactly what baseline does.
I think we're slowly running out of time for questions. So I just have a quick follow-up on this question, and Ilan will have one more question. But let's try to answer very quickly these two. Okay, so my follow-up is, it seems like, so you have a unique characterization of PageRank for the numbers, but maybe these axioms are not enough to uniquely characterize PageRank rankings. So in principle, I guess it's possible that maybe there are 2 different centrality measures that give the same ranking as PageRank, but are different numerically?
That's definitely true. So as I said, so right now you cannot use this axiom to get a ranking of get the axiomization of the ranking. You cannot do that. And oh, you are saying something opposite, right? Are you saying something opposite? Because
my true that,
yeah. Sorry.
So okay, maybe let's take it offline, and let's give Ilan the chance.
We're not allowed to take anything offline. It's lockdown.
Let's do it online with a smaller set of people.
So maybe there is no time for a quick answer, but you said that you see some importance that the values are cardinal and not only the ranking. What value do you see for saying this edge is twice as important than the other, or maybe even this edge is more important than the sum of the importance of these two edges? What is the semantics that you see for this kind of statements?
I think it's like, so it's important whether you win by a big distance or you win by a small distance, right? So this is why the numeric values are important, I think. So I think it's like what people in biological networks actually sometimes do is that they actually have some cutoff value, and they say, okay, if you have a centrality smaller than this, then your centrality is 0. Then we don't care about you. If you have a ranking, you don't know where to put this, right? So where is this threshold that you should, what threshold you should use, because you have a ranking and you can only just dismiss like some percentage of all nodes. Yeah, so it's less accurate, right?
But for that you need some meaning of saying. Okay.
No, but, so we are running out of time. So maybe let's hope maybe. So essentially, we have to move this discussion to someplace else. But thank you for the question. And let's now move on to the coffee break. So we'll have 10 minutes coffee break. I guess Dominic will distribute us over different breakout rooms. And let's see how it goes. So welcome back even more. And some, I think, new people are still showing up a little bit, but I think we can start. So our next speaker is Elliot Ancelewicz from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And he's actually quite a guy. He did some work on rather somewhat at least varied topics like approximation algorithms, and what he will talk about today is related: pricing, network formation, matching, routing. In fact, I believe he did some foundational work in algorithmic game theory, in particular regarding price of stability. And what for people who care about citations and things like that, I mean, citations are one thing, but Elliot is actually cited on a Wikipedia page, and that trumps quite a lot. He is also a certified, very high quality teacher, which he almost forbid me to tell, but in fact he is. Well, Elliot, tell us great things.
All right, thank you. So, okay, so I guess this is joint work with Ben and Wanan, who one of them is still my student, the other one recently graduated. And I want to talk about distortion in the metric space. So let me start by just slowly telling you the background and the basic ideas of distortion. Okay, so let me start with the spatial model of social choice. So what I mean here is there are N voters or agents, and there are M candidates or alternatives, very general, very abstract. And the assumption here is that all of these agents and alternatives all are points in a metric space. So just triangle inequality, that's the only assumption. So let me try to start by motivating this a little bit. So you have a common kind of things like this. This is a metric space. It's a very simple one-dimensional metric space of a political spectrum, left versus right, and these, A, B, C are, are candidates or alternatives. And if I'm a voter, like over here, then maybe I like person B better than I like person A, and I like person C even worse. So how much I like them is the distance from me to them. So this is a very simple metric space. You can look at two-dimensional things, of, more ideologies. You can look at something even more complicated, like the Downsian proximity model, where you have something like it's a 1,000-dimensional space where every dimension corresponds to an issue, and your location is on that dimension is similar to a candidate if you agree on that issue. So you can have a gigantic dimensional metric space. In fact, it doesn't even have to be ideological metric space. You could say something like the alternatives or the candidates are locations, actual physical locations of where we plan to build a post office or a mall or a library. And the voters' agents are people who actually live in houses and they want the new post office to be built close to them. So anything like this where you have some measure of distance, and what a voter wants is a candidate who's close to them according to this distance is what the spatial model is talking about. Okay, so that's the sort of background of spatial social choice. And just to make this more precise here, so what are we saying? The model is you have voters and candidates are just points in an arbitrary metric space. So just some notion of distances. Each voter prefers candidates which are closer to themselves. So these red points are the voters, these blue squares are the candidates. And now, unlike in most social choice, we can now say, okay, what is the best candidate? Which is the candidate, which is the alternative, which is truly the best one? Well, we have to define some notion of objective. I mean, usually there is no such thing as the best candidate, obviously. But here we can define an actual objective. And there are many different objectives people have used for this kind of stuff. The one we'll use, which is definitely not the perfect one, but the one we'll use for this talk, and a lot of other people have used as well, is just this objective. So our goal is to find the candidate so that the total distance of all the voters to them is as small as possible, or the average distance, same thing, of course. So we just want the one that if you sum up the distance from all the voters, it will be as small as possible. So here, every voter, so just the voter, prefers the candidate which is as close to them as possible. So they prefer B to A to C because B is closer. And what we want is we want the candidate so that the total distance from all the voters, vis-a-vis some of these blue arrows, the total distance is as small as possible. So in this example, that would be B. Okay, so that's the basic model. Now, how do we do this? Well, it's kind of trivial. We're given all the, these points, all the red voters, all the blue candidates. We're trying to find the square, the candidate, so that the total distance is as small as possible. Okay, just sum up the distances and take the candidate with the smallest sum of distances. So what's the problem there? It seems very easy. The problem is, of course, that usually we don't know the actual distances. So these blue arrows, the length of the distance from a voter to a candidate, we don't know exactly what that value is. So what do we know? Well, often what we know is something a lot less than that. For example, often what we know is the ordinal preferences. So here is the basic notion of distortion, the basic notion of this idea. So again, we're only going to be given the ordinal preferences of all the voters. So it's these things. So this is the input to our voting protocol or voting mechanism or algorithm, whatever. This is the input. So for every voter, for every red dot, we're told, here's my favorite candidate, here's my second favorite, third favorite, ordinal preferences, as is common in social choice. And our goal is still the same. Our goal is to find the candidates so that the total distance to them is as small as possible. But we don't know the distances. We only know this stuff. And we have this extra, one bit of information, which is we know that these preferences, these ordinal preferences, come from a metric space. So we know that if voter 1 likes A better than B better than C, that means they're actually closer to A than B than C. How in the world do we do this? Given only this information, not given the truth, which is this stuff, how in the world can we find the best outcome, the one that minimizes the total distance? And the answer is, of course, it's impossible. Let's look at this example on the right very quickly. So these are the voters. 1 and 2 are the voters. The things on the right are the candidates. These are the distances, 1, 20, 11, 10. These obey triangle inequality, so this could be a metric space. In this case, the best outcome is the x1. But we don't know these distances. We only know this stuff. We know that person 1 prefers x1, person 2 prefers x2. That's all we know. How can we possibly tell which one is better? We can't. We just have to choose one arbitrarily. So we cannot possibly get the best outcome. And the goal in research on distortion, the goal in this talk and in this area, is to instead find an outcome which is small distortion. So here's this formula. Let me just tell you what it means. It just means something very simple. It's just an approximation. Our goal is to find an outcome which is guaranteed to be close to the optimum, no matter what metric space it is, no matter what the true distances are, based only on this ordinal information, based on this input. It should be that whatever outcome we return, which is their total cost, their total distance, should be small compared to the optimum distance, which we can never find. That is distortion. Distortion is how well the mechanism does, how well the outcome it produces does, compared to the true optimum, which you can never find unless you know the actual distances. Okay, so that's the background. And there's been quite a bit of work in this area. So just to give you a basic idea of here's a bunch of stuff people have done over the years. I think it's kind of amazing that you can actually get good approximations here. Again, without knowing the distances, only knowing the ordinal information, you can come up with a small constant approximation to the true optimum. You can always guarantee something that's a factor of 3 away from optimum. In fact, there was a talk in this exact seminar about this result, which I think is an amazing result. I think Nisar Shah gave the talk sometime in maybe July or August. So you can go back and rewatch it. I certainly recommend it. And so what they showed is, as you can see, there's a bunch of different mechanisms people have looked at and try to quantify their distortion. That's again, how well they do in terms of the objective of the total distance while knowing only the ordinal information. So that's what distortion is. And it can be really bad for things like plurality, and it can be really good for some well-known mechanisms like Copeland, but for some new mechanisms formed for this purpose, like plurality matching. So this is now known, and it's pretty amazing. And this is really tight now. So there's nothing you can do that's better, because there are easy lower bounds. Say you cannot possibly come up with a mechanism which is better than distortion 3. You cannot consistently get something that's closer than a factor of 3 to optimum. That's impossible. And since it's tight, it's guaranteed you can always get something within a factor of 3, which again is amazing. Okay, so that's the background. So my time is half over. So now let me tell you about what I actually want to talk about today. And that is, all right, so this is what you can do if you know only ordinal information. But what if you know a little bit more than just ordinal preferences? So what if you know a little bit more about voter preference strength, which I think makes sense. So maybe you shouldn't know the exact distances, the exact, I like this person exactly, 3.7 times as much as I like this person. That doesn't really make sense. But it also doesn't make sense often to think you only know preferences. For political candidates, you certainly know the level of extreme supporters often, not always, but often. You can tell it from gathering various data. How much people contribute their time, how much people volunteer for this political candidate, how many donations do they get and how big donations are. how quickly people respond to survey, you can get all this information to figure out, this person is preferred to this one, but you can also figure out this person is heavily preferred by this many people to this one. So it often makes sense to know the level of support for them as opposed to just preferred or not preferred. So what if you know a little bit more information about these preference strengths as opposed to just I prefer them over this one? So in addition to ordinal preferences. Okay, so let me define what I mean by preference strength first. So I'll try to do it in this picture. So let's say there are two candidates, P and Q, and we have these voters I and J. So what do ordinal preferences tell you? Ordinal preference is just I prefers P over Q. It basically tells you, if you have this dividing line between P and Q, here I'm assuming it's like a nice Euclidean space. It doesn't have to be. This is just for having a nice picture. It can be an arbitrary metric space. But in this Euclidean space, it just tells you basically I is on the P side of this dividing line or on the Q side. That's what ordinal preference tells you. I prefers P over Q. But what if you also know something else like these circles? So this circle on the left are all the people who prefer P to Q at least twice as much. So their distance to P is half of their distance to Q at most. So what if you also know that I lies in this circle? So they prefer P heavily compared to Q. That's what preference strength is. Preference strength is just the ratio of the distance from I to P compared to the ratio of distance from I to Q. So it's how much more I like P compared to Q. And what the question I'm asking right now is, what if we know, okay, so what if we know, we don't know the exact preference strengths. That's too much information. Knowing exactly how much I prefer P over Q is too much to know. But what if we know basically these four sets? We know how many people prefer P to Q heavily, so how many people are inside the circle. We know how many people prefer Q to P heavily, how many people are inside the circle. And we know how many people prefer P to Q, but not strongly. So these are people that are inside this area. So we know these four sets instead of just the two sets of who prefers P and who prefers Q. That's the new setting. So for candidates, let's say there's two candidates, although you can have more, P and Q, the preference strength is just how much I like Q compared to how much I like P. And there's a threshold. This threshold that says, this is the only thing I know is, are you above the threshold or are you below the threshold, according to this preference strength? For example, if this threshold is 2, it just tells me, do you like P at least twice as much as Q or less than that? And that's what we know now. We know ordinal preferences. We still know, do I like P better than Q? And we know this threshold. So do I like P better than Q at least tau amount or less than tau amount? So what can we do if we have this extra information? Not surprisingly, we can do better, right? Because we have, beyond ordinal preferences, we have extra information. We also now know how many people like P strongly, how many people like Q strongly, and how many people are mostly indifferent. So so this is what we know now. This is what our input is. And here's some results. You can look at the paper for details. But basically, I'll just, here's a graph. So this is just with two candidates for now. Multiple candidates is more annoying to graph. It's a more ugly formula, as you can see. But for two candidates, I think it's really simple. So if you only know ordinal information, if you know how many people like P, how many people like Q, you cannot do better than 3. It's impossible. There are lower bounds. But if you also have this threshold information, if you choose a threshold well enough, if you know exactly how many people like P 1 plus square root of 2 times better than they like Q, then you can actually get a 1.83 approximation. So you can always guarantee that the one you choose is within 1.83 of the true optimum. You can never know what the true optimum is, but you can guarantee it's within that factor of true optimum. And so this also kind of tells you, if you can pick the threshold, it's very important which one you pick. So picking something around this area, around a factor of 2 or 3 is a really good idea. Finding out how many people liked it at least 3 times as much. If you can quantify that by putting money into it, surveys, whatever, then that can give you a really good way of choosing the outcome. So that's kind of what's going on here. You can also ask a question of what happens if you don't even know ordinal preferences. Like you cannot tell apart somebody who likes P versus somebody who likes Q if it's by not very much, which again kind of makes sense. If somebody's mostly indifferent, you often can't tell them apart if they slightly prefer P versus slightly prefer Q. So what if you don't know this line, basically? You only know how many people are inside this circle, how many people are inside this circle, and how many people are somewhere outside. Well, then there's not much you can do. For two candidates, you just have to choose the one with more extreme supporters, because you only know how many people prefer P strongly, how many people prefer Q strongly, and how many people are indifferent. You're kind of limited in what social choice mechanisms you can use. So of course, choose the one that has more extreme supporters. And again, you can show that things are pretty good. You know, without this, again, ordinal mechanisms only give you 3, but here, if you have a threshold of 2, you can get a 2 approximation. So you get something that's guaranteed to produce an outcome within a factor of 2 of optimal. So this is kind of, again, you can look at the paper, but this is kind of the general idea. It's not surprising that if you have this little bit of extra information, you can do much better. What I think is surprising is that you can do a lot better and that the choice of threshold really matters. So you can also generalize this to many thresholds. You know, it's not so, whatever, it's not so surprising and not so interesting. You can also look at what if you know the exact preference strengths for every single person. It's like, you know, infinite amount of thresholds, basically. I'll point out that this does not mean you can get the optimum, because you still know only relative preference strengths. Like I know how much I like P compared to how much I like Q. I still don't know the exact distances. So you cannot do better than square root of 2, even if you know all the thresholds. Even if you know exact preference strength, you still cannot do better than square root of 2 in terms of distortion, which I think answers one of the questions somebody asked in chat, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So that's kind of the basic idea, is that of course extra information improves the quality of your outcome. And here, awareness of voter passion, by which I just mean knowing a tiny little bit of amount, like an extra bit for every voter, extra bit for every pair of candidates, about how much they prefer one compared to the other, not the exact preference strength, but just is it above the threshold or below, can greatly improve distortion. Since I have, I think, like 1 more minute, I will also mention other things. Of course, there's lots of work about what extra information can improve distortion. I'll mention something else, which I in a paper on last year, I think, or a year and a half ago or something, which is what if you also know the exact locations of the candidates or the alternatives, but don't know voter locations? That can also greatly improve distortion. So this is, again, makes sense in a lot of settings, like what if you're actually building facilities, again, post offices or something. It makes sense to know the proposed locations of where they should be built. It doesn't necessarily make sense to know exactly who is voting for their locations. And so what's happening with that is kind of interesting. This is the last thing I'm going to say. So if you know the exact candidate locations, you can get a factor of 3. Okay, well, that's not surprising. You can get a factor of 3 in general anyway. What's cool is that you can extend this result to much, much more general stuff than just electing a single outcome. You can extend it to other objective functions like median. You can extend it to matchings, facility location, all kinds of other things. And if you know the locations of the things you're planning to build, then you can end up with a very small distortion, small approximation, while only knowing ordinal information. That's very small, being factor of 3. So this, so knowing knowing candidate locations doesn't necessarily give you better distortion when you're just choosing a single outcome, but things like choosing a committee or things like choosing a matching, it can result in very, very nice approximations, very nice distortion. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say. So thanks. Let me look at the questions.
Thank you very much. So let's turn on our microphones and give a round of applause. And now I think there's a number of questions in the chat, so I think I'll leave these to you, Elliot. And,
sure. Yeah, let me just start in order. Okay, so first question. Is there any lower bound below 3 known depending on threshold? Yeah, so so I guess I already answered this partially. So as I mentioned, even if you know all the thresholds, you cannot do better than square root of 2. And in fact, in fact, these bounds, I believe, are tight for 2 candidates, but not tight for multiple candidates. So this is also so this curve also shows a lower bound based on the threshold. I think that's true. I have to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Let's see. Next question. How about instead of working with a given fixed tau, you ask, is this preference of agent I for A is greater than B above average among agents with A is greater than B? That's an interesting idea. So so I don't know the answer. What happens with that? So you can basically see.
Can I maybe explain why I asked this? Because I had the impression that you might get the best approximation ratio if your tau is somehow happily chosen, that it divides the groups of voters more or less evenly. Would be a guess that that's helpful. So what if you're allowed to do it the other way around? You are just can engineer that. You're allowed to engineer the tau per pairwise comparison. That it nicely divides them 50-50 more or less. I would guess that is the most informative thing and might help with the approximation.
Yeah, and so obviously, median would be useless because it would just be half our better, half our worse. But yeah, average distance, that will tell you something about the actual distances, which is what this is doing as well. Yes, I don't know the answer, but that's a good idea. So it might give us something. I mean, it cannot give you something, I think, better than this, because no matter which threshold you come up with, it won't get past this lower bound, but it might somehow more automatically find the good threshold. So I think it's a good question. Okay, let's see. Nisar's question, what about randomized rules for choosing a candidate or for choosing tau? So the answer is, I have no idea. So a lot of, as Nisar very well knows, a lot of these results on distortion, including these, are for deterministic rules, and a lot less is known for randomized rules. So we don't have a tight mechanism for randomized rules in this case either. And that's also the case for this voter preference frames. This is only for deterministic rules, and the lower bounds are only for deterministic rules. Once you're doing randomization, you might be able to do much better. We tried some very simple things, and they didn't work out. So I don't know, but that's as far as we got. So that's also a good thing to work on. Okay, next question. Does it make sense to consider such distortion notion when choosing K winners, and the distance of a voter to a committee is a minimum distance to one of the committee members? This is K median. So the answer is yes, absolutely. This is something that I've actually have spent a bunch of time thinking about. So if the distance is defined as the sum of the distances to the winners, then it's easy. Like all this stuff generalizes pretty easily. But if it's the K-median question of the distance to the closest one, as far as so even for getting this preference strength stuff, even for just classic distortion, which is these things, basically nothing is known for this. It's one of in my opinion, it's one of the biggest open questions in this area right now. So if you know the candidate positions, going all the way to the end of my talk, if you know the candidate positions, then the very last line, then you can do it. You can basically get a nice approximation, nice distortion, if you know the candidate positions. Even if you don't know the voter, just the candidate positions. But if you only have ordinal preferences for the voters, and you know nothing about the candidate positions, it's totally open. Like I think there aren't even any good lower bounds. So I think that's one of the great open questions in distortion right now. Somebody can correct me if they disagree, but that's my opinion. And if you know any recent work on it, please tell me. But I haven't seen anything certainly in the last few months. Okay, last question on chat. Have you considered quasi-order ballots, where a voter ranks P over Q if it prefers P over Q by some threshold ratio or more. Let's see. So basically,
could I expand on that a bit? A quasi-order
Yeah,
has a potentially intransitive indifference relation, although the strict preference relation is transitive, and therefore it's not really the same as a ranking.
okay, so let's see. So it means I might prefer, okay. So again, the quick answer is no, I haven't considered. But so this would be something like this, right? So I would say that I know for every voter I know. I see. Okay, but it would be a ranking over total candidates. Interesting.
It's not literally a ranking.
Yeah, yes, but
there's still be a binary relation, but a natural one.
It would be a relation over candidates. Yes.
Yeah.
Over all the candidates. My gut feeling to this is that it won't. But if you try to do this with many candidates at once, it won't give you anything too good. I mean, with two candidates, it basically becomes equivalent to this, right? But with more than that, I don't know. I have to think about it. Sorry, no better answer than that. But no, we have not considered that. Let me write it down. Actually, I think I want to think about this a bit. All right. Any other questions?
Hello. The chat will be saved. You don't have to write it down. You will find it on the website.
Okay. I think Piotr, I think you're muted.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Sure, I think so.
Hello, Professor. I think the topic is very interesting, but the ratios of the two cycles depends on how popular of one candidate, right? The ratios of the circle.
The ratio depends on which threshold we choose.
For the candidates, for the two.
So it's like this. So the threshold tells us what we know. We know how many people prefer P over Q by at least the threshold tau.
But here we just talk about the extreme spotters, the super fans, right?
That's what tau means. So if tau is factor of 2, then the super fans would be people who prefer P by at least a factor of 2.
Yeah. But I found a really interesting phenomenon, especially for the election in America this year. And I noticed that most of people, not most people, many people, they are the extreme supporters of Donald Trump, but they are not so extreme supporters of Joe Biden, but there are also many people don't like Donald Trump. So I think the ratios of the Bidens will be smaller than the ratios of Trump's, but the result is that Trump lose the election. So will you consider the fans, the negative fans, the extreme the extreme against her, like this?
I think that's a good question. So first of all, for two candidates, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you just for them compared to the other person. But of course, this is all for many candidates as well. So the metric space function kind of encodes, I mean, the whole point of the metric space assumption is already encodes a structure on voter preferences. So you can have, so if I like P a lot, that tells you something about the distance to Q. Now, if we don't have the metric space assumption, you can have all kinds of things like I like this person a lot, I hate this other person a lot, and so on. I guess my answer is that, as usual, my answer is no, we have not looked at specifically people hating somebody and measuring the hate. We've only looked at their location in the metric space, where they're located, how close are they to P compared to Q. But in general, it makes sense to say, I have a measure of how much I like them, and I have a measure of how much I hate somebody else, and possibly have two measures, but then it has to be normalized somehow, because you can't just have arbitrarily separate numbers. So, so I guess I would say, I guess my short answer is, if you're going to try to measure how much people hate somebody, as well as how much they like them, have negative things, you need some sort of a structural assumption about preferences, about utilities, about something. Either it's normalized in some way or it's a metric space. And if you have this normalizing assumption, then it tells you, knowing how much they like somebody should tell you how much they hate somebody else, because it's normalized in some way. And if it's not related in any way, then you can't do anything, because then you might as well just go back to ordinal preferences, because you know, if you have completely arbitrary utilities, completely arbitrary preferences, numerical, with no structure, no normalization, no metric space, then it really doesn't mean anything.
But I think that is not 100% go this way, because even for America, there is still a liberal party, and I think if all the right-wing voters don't vote for liberal and vote for Donald Trump, and things may be quite different. So maybe there are some situations I don't like Donald Trump, and I also don't like Joe Biden, and I vote for Liberal Party. And they
Sure.
also do
It has nothing to do with this. That just means the metric space is more complicated and multidimensional.
Oh, okay.
Right, like I'm not saying it's a line.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, sorry. Maybe ask me afterwards if I didn't understand. Okay, let's see, another question. What if some voters are more informed, so they can give you whether they like more or less than tau, but for others, we just don't know the answer? Yes, okay, so that we actually did look at for once. We looked at what happens if for some fraction of voters, you get their ordinal preferences, but for another fraction, you get the actual tau threshold as well. So we don't, what I talked about here is we get both the tau threshold and the ordinal preference for everybody, but what if maybe half of them we know only ordinal preferences, the other half we know both? Then you can generalize these results, but it's sort of not interesting. It's just a straightforward generalization of, I only have this information for this subset of voters, so I can use this. And but yes, it's still more information than before, and you can get a curve, like this, but based on also how much of the voters you have the threshold for. But it's not very interesting. At least our results weren't very interesting in terms of generalization. Like in real life, it might be quite interesting to know what fraction of voters you would need to know this extra information for, but you probably would have to make some assumption about the voter distribution or something. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I think we're actually, we essentially run out of time for questions, even though I'm still tempted to ask one, but I will stop myself. And Ulla actually wanted to make an announcement at the end of this talk. So Ulla, tell us announcements.
Well, thank you first very much, Piotr, for hosting this nice session and for finding these people to speak to us. So we're now going to have a little bit of a break in the seminar for the new year, for Christmas, for the people who are into that sort of stuff. And we're going to start again on the 14th of January with Kate Larson and Ernesto Sarvalho. The abstracts will be announced sometime early next year. I should say, so this is during the week of IJCAI, and I haven't managed to find the actual program online. So in case it happens that exactly on that day, in those hours, they schedule all the computational social choice talks, possibly the amazing talk I'm sure that the other Piotr is going to give there, then we'll find quickly a solution and maybe move to another day. But for now, it's going to be that, and hope to see you all there. And wish you all a happy new year.
So happy new year to you too, and thanks. And see you all soon.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.